Dear students, today we are going to discuss about in the management thoughts. We are going to discuss about the neoclassical theory. This neoclassical theory is developed between 1920s to 1950s. So the traditional classical theory and its principles are attacked on the ground. They are contradictory. They pay little attention to motivation and make hasty pronouncement of what should be done without examining the exemption. So, management perspective underlining some pronouncements. As such, so many principles do not represent the heart of knowledge of management, but a small uh, part of the total theory, which overemphasized the mechanical and psychological, physiological character of management, which came up the school of neoclassical theory with a more human oriented approach and emphasis on the needs, drives, behaviors, and attitudes of individuals. Another impetus mm, was the two important groups, which is namely human relations schools and behavioral schools. The human behavioral school was developed in 1920s and behavioral schools was developed in 1930s. These two theory comes under the neoclassical theory, and it names with and this human relation movement of 1940s and 1950s filled many gaps in knowledge about the business organization, but it did little to fill major gaps in the management theory or to create a new and viable theory of management. The number one theory under this category is human relation schools. Alton Mayo he is considered as a father of human relation movement, which he later became organizational behavior. So the other two important co-researcher of this school was FJ and William J. So they believe that organizations always involve interrelationships among members, and that it is the manager role to see that relations are as conflict free as possible. So in order to accomplish the organization's objectives, they believe that the human aspects of business organization had been largely ignored. So they felt that satisfaction of psychological needs should be the primary concern of the management. So the famous authors, they felt that if the best work environment could be determined, that means just the was one best way to perform the job could be determined by scientific management, then workers should be more efficient and they become less tired. So they also felt that the importance of evaluating the attitudes and reactions of workers to their jobs and their environment. They attempted they attempted thought through several experiments to determine the relationship between working condition and productivity. They set up the test groups for which changes were made in lighting, frequency of rest periods, and working hours, and control groups for which they have no changes was made. Various authors in their initial lighting experiment, they came to the conclusion that some factors other than the light were responsible for increased productivity. So from the follow-up interview of employees, they realized that people were not living their feelings, attitude, and emotions at home, and employees were not work simply for economic benefits, but the other dimension also affected their performance. So in a final experiment, they discovered that the workers had standard of behavior which is called a norm, which was enforced by the work group to the point that output was restricted. Any worker who produced more than that number was uh, pressurized by a co-worker to comply with the norm. M- Many researchers, they have arrived at the two important conclusions. The number one conclusion was existence of strong informal group, and number two conclusion is employees behavior at work is affected by pan economic factors. So they revealed some inadequacies of the rational and structured approaches of classical theory and fallacy of viewing all workers as rational and economic. So thus it involved a special person view of employees from the Hawthorne studies. As against the rational economic view, the social person view is that the individuals are motivated by social needs. People abstain with the sense of identity through interpersonal relationships. Because of industrial progress and routinization, the work has become dissatisfying. Employees are more responsive to special social forces of peer groups than to incentives and controls of management. Employees respond to provision for their social needs and acceptance offered by management. So, the social person view of human relations school have unnecessitated managerial strategies for improving the human skills of the supervisors, replacing individual incentive plan by group incentive plan, focusing on employees feeling and attitudes, and their managers have evolved, and the social manager assumes the role of helpers and coach, and carries out human relations program, shunning a stern and aloof theory attitude. In the human relations approach, which laid greater emphasis on the work group and need for better communication between supervisors and workers. The human relation movement is looked as a trend towards power equalization. It is an attempt to reduction in the power and status differential between supervisors and subordinates. It is also looked upon as a continuing reaction against the emphasis on programmed work, rigid hierarchical control, and a high degree of specialization of terrorism. However, they did not reject all the classical ideas, and neoclassical writer believed that treating employees like individual would make them act according to the principles. So they said treat employees as if they are important and give the worker the feeling of participation. The limitation of this theory is it has several limitations also, because it is considered to be a swing in the opposite direction of the classical theory. In other words, we can say they saw the only human variables as critical and ignored other, other variables. So every organization is made of a number of diverse social groups with compatible values and interests. So these groups might cooperate in some spheres and compete and clash in others. It is practically impossible to satisfy everybody and turn the organization into a big happy family. So this approach is overemphasized the importance of symbolic rewards, which may be appreciated by recipients, significant others, and underplays the role of material rewards. Furthermore, we can say the assumption about the formation of informal groups is unrealistic and not very common, because informal groups can only make the workers' day more pleasant and not his repetitive, monotonous, and uncertain, uncreative work. So workers do not come to the work to seek affection and affiliation. So the techniques of human relations school try to play a trick on workers to create a false sense of happiness and are not really concerned with their real well-being. So there is a difference between allowing workers to participate in making decisions and letting workers think that they are participating. So in this sense, this approach is also production oriented and not employee oriented. The unqualified application of this technique is all situation is not possible. So thus the human relation movement accepted many of the assumptions of the scientific management thinkers, and it did not achieve a major breakthrough in management theory. That's it for today. Thank you so much.